Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, the leaders of the Great Return March surprised the world when they organized the first demonstration along the Israel-Gaza fence on March 30th, 2018. Tens of thousands of Palestinians participated, and already in the inaugural protest, Israeli snipers opened fire. They killed 14 Palestinians then and they wounded over 1,200 people. The over-aggressive response of the IDF continues to maim and kill hundreds of civilians, affecting Palestinians across the board. But Israel's occupation forces have detained 21 Palestinians in further raids earlier this week on the West Bank. Also, Israeli forces also razed Palestinian-owned lands with bulldozers during the incursions in the Gaza Strip. Now, these kind of incidents continue to happen as the world stage is distracted by other wars in the region. What will be the plight of the Palestinians? When will this conflict come to an end? And is there even a solution that one could look into? To discuss this and more, I would like to welcome our guests to Newswire. Dr. Azam is a political analyst who will be joining us here via Skype from London, and Ms. Mary Saliba, a journalist who will be also joining us from Istanbul. Welcome to the show to both of you. Trying to go forward in understanding this conflict zone as IDF continues to fire on Palestinians protesting in Gaza and the blockade that is not yet removed. Is there any hope that in the ongoing conversations that are taking place in the Middle East by regional powers? And Dr. Thamini, this question is for you. Can we see anything resolving on this front also?
Well, there hasn't been much talking recently, especially between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The only thing that is going on is the security arrangements and the security coordination between the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah and the Israeli occupation authorities. As far as the Palestinian issue is concerned, the Palestinians have been under occupation for 70 years now, more than 70 years. And what we see of the vicious treatment meted to them has never stopped for 70 years. But nevertheless, the Palestinians continue their struggle. For the Palestinians, it's a simple issue. Their land was invaded. They were dispossessed, and just like every other nation in the world, they need to keep the struggle going until their rights are recognized and they regain their freedom.
And Ms. Mary, on the same note, what our guest Dr. Thamini is saying, do you see or observe a change in the movement of Palestinians? And is this becoming more indigenous, more violent in laying down their lives? Or is the allegation of the IDF holds true in any way that this is Hamas's power getting stronger, using the Great Return March as a front to attack Israeli side of the fence?
Look, no, I don't think that's a justifiable or reasonable logic at all coming from the IDF or the Israeli authorities. I think we really have to look at the reality and look at the history of this conflict and really take into account that, firstly, Israel is not a democracy. It is not a country or a government that adheres to any equal, sound rule of law. It is quite arbitrary in its dealings with Palestinian people, also differentiating Palestinian people who are not citizens of Israel, treating them very differently to Israeli citizens. So you really have to look at the creation of Israel. This history is not sound, and as I said, there is absolutely no rule of law. Palestinian people are treated arbitrarily. There is immense structural, cultural, and systematic violence against Palestinian people who have absolutely no negotiating or playing power against, a larger, more powerful force like the Israelis.
Okay, and Dr. Thamini, if we try to understand the legality of this fence across which this continued violence takes place, the buffer zone that was created by Israel, if we try to understand what, in your view, is the legality of the fence that Israel has created? Can they keep calling it a border? Do you agree with that?
Well, there's nothing legal about it. Palestine is occupied by a foreign power, and this is the Zionists who came from Europe because they once had a problem in Europe, and they thought they could resolve their problem at our own expense. They dispossessed us. They threw us out of our homes. I mean, look at Gaza. 90% of the population of Gaza, their actual homes are in what is today considered by the world community to be Israel. These people want to go back home. Their homes are occupied by people who came from the Ukraine, from Poland, from America, from South Africa, from some of the Arab countries where Jewish communities lived for thousands of years until they were driven out by Zionist intrigues. So there's nothing legal about whatever the Zionists are doing in Palestine or to the Palestinians. And this is not a war between Arabs and Jews or the Muslims and the Jews. This is simply a war of liberation, just like other nations in the world were invaded and occupied by colonial powers. They had to fight, they had to resist, and seek their freedom. This is exactly what the Palestinians are doing.
And Ms. Saliba, what is happening on a broader scale as we are seeing the U.S. trying to realign or bring together the Arab states to put pressure on Iran? It's also, since they've been the biggest backers of Israel, it's also seen by experts as a way to get them to join hands with Israel. How will that in any way resolve the issue of the Gaza blockade? Or is that not even a priority at the moment for anybody in the region?
Sure. Look, if we're referring to Benjamin Netanyahu's visits to Arab countries recently, particularly the Gulf countries, Oman, Bahrain, and developing a relationship there, it is not in Benjamin Netanyahu's agenda to create some sort of Palestinian stability for Palestinian people. That's not the reason why he's approaching these very wealthy Arab states. He's purely interested in Iran. These Gulf states as well do see Iran as a threat or want to contain the Iranian spread in the region. And this is a commonality between Israel and Netanyahu and the Arab states that do have money, sadly enough, and who could actually help the Palestinian people have a decent livelihood and a sense of self-determination.
Okay, Dr. Tamimi, let's pull you in to get your take on this. How do you see especially what is happening in the Arab states and the Arab world with the U.S., with Pompeo's visit in trying to get all of them to get together and also, in a way, align themselves with Israel by putting pressure on Iran? Do you see that this is being counterproductive, or is Israel and Palestine issue not a priority in this conversation at the moment?
Well, it is important to realize that the current reality is the product of the Arab Spring or the Arab revolutions that started in late 2010, early 2011. There are a number of Arab governments, prominently Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, who are horrified at the prospect of these peoples rising and seeking transformation towards democratization. Israel, at the same time, was horrified at the prospect that such a radical change in the region would be in favor of the Palestinians, because the Arab masses would, for a change, have the free will to stand by their Palestinian brethren. So Israel's Netanyahu and the dictators in the Gulf, as well as in Egypt, which is a product of a military coup against democracy, came together, joined forces in order to prevent the dynamic that started about 6 or 7 years ago. This is the real issue. And Iran is only a pretext used by the Gulf countries, a pretext used by the Israelis.
But Gaza in itself provides absolutely nothing. It's a very small strip of land. There are 2 million Palestinians living there in deplorable conditions. What is the incentive? Is this a conversation about Israel and Gaza having a border, or is this beyond that?
Now, what Gaza provides is a model that horrifies both Arab dictators as well as Israel. It's a model of persistence, a model of resistance, a model of steadfastness. The people of Gaza, the majority of whom happen to be refugees from Palestine that was occupied in 1948, continue to insist on going back home. And this is what makes the difference. What the Israelis succeeded in doing in the West Bank, that is entering into an arrangement with the PLO in order to pacify the Palestinians in the West Bank, has miserably failed in Gaza. And Gaza is defiant. This is the difference.
Okay, and Ms. Saliba, let me ask you this. In terms of the legality, we're still trying to flesh out what exactly is the international community's take on this, especially when human rights organizations, the Amnesty International, has come out and say that this is a horrifying open-air prison-like situation on the ground. In terms of the legal aspect of it, what can the UN, what can the International Criminal Court can take a stand on in trying to resolve the issue here?
Well, that's exactly the question, because Israel is heavily involved and backed by the US when it comes to international decisions and resolutions under the UN. Even with Palestine considering the application to become a member state of the UN, the US has clearly said, no, we will not support you, we will veto this. However, it's very important for Palestinians to have that psychological security, that they are a nation, a group, a race, that they have a home, that they have a sense of belonging. And the UN is not even providing Palestinian people with that. I think the US is really playing a very nasty game against the Palestinian people. It's supporting Israel all the way when there is clear breach, constant, continuous, abrupt violation of human rights against these people who have no future. Gaza is an open prison. IDF detain Palestinian people constantly without being in accordance with due or legal process, without any procedural fairness, without documentation, without charge sheets, without a fair hearing. And also, legally, Palestinian people do not have any jurisdiction in an Israeli military court. And that's where all the arrests and detentions and criminal sentencing is taking place, particularly for minors who are as young as 12 years old. So I think the US can do really a much more tremendous job in recognizing the human rights and the dignity of Palestinian people, since they say that they are the champion of human rights and that they are particularly concerned with human rights in the Arab world. But we are not seeing this from the US. And sadly, I do not expect that we will.
Dr. Thamini, do you agree that US has continuously gone against their own mantra of being champion of human rights, especially considering when they cut aid for the Palestinians, and as a result, the World Food Program had to stop providing food to 27,000 Palestinians there?
Well, when it comes to Palestine, the United States of America has been the most hypocritical authority on the face of the earth. All the slogans of democracy and human rights and civil liberties are completely ignored when it comes to the Palestinians. I don't remember a time when the United States of America, as a country or as an authority, stood by justice in Palestine. They just stand by Zionism simply because of the impact and influence of the Zionist lobby in the United States of America, where you can hardly find someone in authority in America who can become or can ascend to that seat of authority without being acknowledged or approved by the Zionist lobby in the United States of America. It's really regrettable. Now, we hope that a change will happen sometime in the future, especially after many Americans have seen what Trump has done, not only to America, but to the entire world. Hopefully, this will be a wake-up call for the American people.
And here I would like to welcome another guest, Dr. Khalid Kadumi, who's joining us from Tehran. You're a political analyst. We're talking about whether U.S. continues to follow what it propagates, calling itself a human rights champion in light of what is happening in Palestine with Palestinians.
For the United States of America, when we talk about something relevant to the human rights, then we are out of the context because themselves they have withdrawn from every international institution or legitimate international institutions talking about the human rights. Talking about human rights, you should not be that much exposed in alliance with the Israeli regime, the regime who has killed civilians in Palestine, the regime who has killed the medical cadres in Palestine, this regime who is no more hidden his atrocities and his wars of crimes against humanity. America is, when we talk about human rights, America is not on board at all in the humanity aspects, in our Palestinian street, in all streets who are talking about freedom and the rights of the oppressed people, especially in Palestine.
So how do you see this, Dr. Kadumi? How do you see this evolving as a conflict? Because every day, more and more Palestinians are shot. Children are shot from 150 meters away in the head. All paramedics, journalists, over 115 have been killed in this since the Great March of Return. How do you see this resolving itself? What can we expect in 2019?
See, let us agree first that we are living in a state of chaos since the New World Order established post the Cold War. And then when we talk about this thing, then we have to expect that the master of this world order has to behave or change his behavior. What we are witnessing that they are going more to the right, they are going more to the extreme in shape of the new elected or the new president in the United States of America. President Trump is talking right, is more extreme, is more warmonger, and he is worse in comparison to any other president of America. If you talk about this thing, then let us decide first what are the duties of every component in this game. We in Palestine, we had our own duties, especially at the diplomatic field and at the resistance field. Our people, they have said it very clearly. We want to live as free as any free nation in the world. If it is in a peaceful way, then we are welcoming any initiative from any side. But if not, we are granted the right to resist and confront the occupying regime with all means. What we have discovered today, that the American administration, they are pushing everyone towards the military solution, towards the confrontation, towards the clash of civilization. They are disastrous. What has been left for us as Palestinians that to move in this very zigzag, harsh international community? The last time we have witnessed how we have won our diplomatic war, I would say it, or our diplomatic maneuver in the United Nations, but with the assistance of the free voices and free nations. We've managed to fizzle out the proposal of the American to condemn the activities of the Palestinian against the occupying regime. Nevertheless, I'm not expecting a good news out of those people or out of those powers. What I'm expecting really is that the way we have managed as Arab and Muslims and free friends in the world to consolidate our position, to fizzle out the endeavors, the negative endeavors of America and Israel in the United Nations, we can do better in the year 2019. On the other hand, for us as Palestinians, we have come to a conclusion that depending on the military solution is the only way which can be understood of the enemy. If the world would like to have a peaceful solution in our region, they have to support the Palestinians who are looking for a peaceful solution through every legitimate means, and not supporting the criminal, the Israeli atrocities. They have to stand beside the right, not for the sake of the Palestinian only, not for the sake of the oppressed people, but for the sake of the security and stability at the level of the world.
Okay, let me ask you, let me pose this question to Dr. and then I'm going to move on to Ms. Mary on the same note. But Dr. Tamimi, history has again and again repeated itself and shown in various examples, Kashmir is one, where the oppressed party, as long as they keep shooting at innocent protesters, the movement becomes more indigenous, it becomes more violent, people lose the meaning of their life and continue to put themselves in harm's way. Do you see this realization anywhere with the Israeli forces, with Israel or the international community, or do you feel that the cost of life is right now not the question at all?
Well, if you go to the refugee camps in Gaza and the West Bank, you will not find Palestinians who are living a dignified life. The Palestinians feel they are already dead, so they might as well die for a good cause. And that is the cause of liberating their land from occupation and regaining their freedom and dignity. Now, of course, the Palestinian issue is one of the most complicated issues simply because Israel is the daughter of the Western civilization. The reason there is Israel today in Palestine is because there was once a problem in Europe, and the Europeans felt they needed to resolve that problem at somebody else's expense. So they planted Zionism in our own homes. And that's why this is a rather difficult issue, but not for the Palestinians. For the Palestinians, it's very simple. Take my mother, for instance. My mother would not have bothered whether there was a Palestinian Authority in Ramallah or whether the United Nations provided us with an empty symbolic gesture of recognizing us as a Palestinian state. My mother would have wanted her home in Beersheba back. There are millions of Palestinians from Jaffa, from Haifa, from Lud, from Safad, from Jerusalem, from Hebron, from everywhere in Palestine who want to go back to their homes. This is the issue, and this is what the struggle will continue until this is achieved.
And Ms. Mary, on the same note, as Dr. Tamimi said, this struggle will continue until they get their homes back. How do you see this unfold? Will Israel ever concede to their demands, or are they going to end up shooting each and every protester with the international community looking away?
Yes, look, I think Israel really is killing Palestinians openly with violence, through structural violence, through detention, through bulldozing their homes, through paying them out with compensation, with the new settlements. Israel has one clear agenda. And the very sad thing is, I think for people in the Arab world, I don't think people detest the Jewish history in the Middle East. Arabs or Muslims or Christians do not detest the Abrahamic history for the Jews. And if they were living among Arabs of different religious denominations like they were before, side by side, I don't think we would have an issue. But this targeting and relentless drive towards getting rid of Palestinians in any way possible. Also, I don't think the US is going to change. The US is, again, like Israel, very concerned with Iranian power in the region.
Very quickly to you, Mr. Kadumi, as we come to the end of the show, what is the IC doing about this conflict? Can they play a more aggressive role? Can the Arab League do more? Or are there too many conflicts within these Arab states itself to focus on something like Gaza?
Unfortunately, you are referring to organizations which they do not try to think to develop their maneuvers or to develop their way in the diplomatic world or in the international community. The OIC or OIC, as you have mentioned, they have failed all causes in the Muslim world till moment. They reach to no result. So, as a logic, if you keep doing the same thing you were doing in the past, you should expect the same result in the past, the fail. What is required today from OIC is, as I have said earlier, I didn't ask them to move an army against Israel. We are asking them to move their diplomatic army over there. We are asking them not to put a dagger in the back of the Palestinian kids through normalization of relations with Israel. The normalization of relations with Israel is a big crime today against the Palestinian and against all Muslim community and against all security aspects in the region. Israel today is a great threat to the security aspects in the world, not only in Palestine. This has been said by every rational aspect. Unfortunately, the rationality, objectivity does not exist today.
They don't exist today. And very quickly, I'm sorry to interrupt you here. I want to ask the last question from Dr. Thamini. Just Monday, this news came in where the Israeli Minister for Internal Security said that we are ready with our plans to occupy the Gaza Strip. When these kind of statements come out, how does this reflect on the intentions of the Israelis in terms of bringing peace and calm, which is something they also propagate in the region?
Well, the Israelis never had the intentions of creating peace and stability in the region. Mm-hmm. And let me tell the Israelis straight, if you really were men, then let's see you come into Gaza. They would have invaded Gaza long ago if they knew they could succeed in doing so. They are cowards. They don't want to die for a cause which they deep within themselves believe to be a false cause. The Palestinians, on the other hand, believe that defending themselves and their homeland is the noblest of causes, and they are willing to die for that cause.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Thamini and Dumi and Mary Saliba, joining us from around the world to talk about Palestine, the fate of Palestinians, and what is happening over the fence. That's all the time we have for this story. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire, and I'm Ayza Omar. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump sends his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to the Middle East to drum up support against Iran. He is pushing for an Arab military alliance to counter threats from Tehran. The aim would be to curb Iran's influence in the region from Yemen to Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Now, Pompeo's visit has included 8 Arab countries covering Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, Bahrain, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Oman. But what action is the United States prepared to take? And what will the regional implications be? To try and understand US's plan for Iran, I'd like to welcome 2 of our guests who are talking to us via Skype from Tehran. We have Mr. Mustafa Khushchacham, and a political analyst, and Ms. Sitara Sadiki, also a researcher, joining us from Tehran. Thank you so much for joining us here on Newswire. Let me start with you, Mr. Mustafa. Do you see a pattern finally emerging, especially in light of international criticism that the U.S. doesn't have a clear policy when it comes to the Middle East?
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, I believe nothing has been accomplished by Pompeo's visit. You know, these Arab sheikhdoms and the southern rims of the Persian Gulf, they are pursuing different foreign policy towards Iran. But Mr. Pompeo's visit and tour of the region was, aimed at explaining the controversial points in the United States foreign policy towards Iran and also towards the Middle East. We know that Pompeo and Bolton are trying to go tough on Iran, in words, of course, but when it comes into actions and interpreted in actions, Donald Trump is calling the decisions, and he has called for a pullout. That has lots of meanings, this pullout, and shows the true and genuine version of the United States foreign policy and the moves to be taken by the United States in coming months.
And Mr. Zara, what is your take on it? Do you see the U.S. policy in the Middle East regarding Iran forming into something more solid? Or is the disintegration of the unity between the Arab states coming in the way of that?
I think basically there is no major change in U.S.'s policy towards Iran because like we are witnessing, U.S. is trying to pull out from Syria after they have been defeated, although they may want to take credit for defeating ISIS, but the truth is there is a growing anti-American sentiments in the Middle East. U.S. government is facing a lot of problems within and without, like outside its borders. So this is like a desperate attempt by the United States to regain some of the supports it used to have among the governments. And let me tell you that this support was only among the regimes. We all know about reactionary regimes that have been stunned U.S. allies, but this is not true about the people, and the people in the Middle East are continually losing trust and favorable views in the U.S. So to me, it looks like a desperate attempt to fix some of that lost favorability in the region. But I don't think it's going anywhere because the U.S. government is facing a shutdown. There are a lot of problems, as I said, with the United States that the President of the United States has to deal with. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope for Pompeo to be able to integrate Arab states into an ally against Iran.
Do you see that is there a disconnect between what is happening on the ground as Pompeo goes and tries to bring the Arab states together to get Qatar to join the alliance, while on the other hand, you see Trump tweeting economic devastation on Turkey?
Like I said, there is not a consistency in Trump's policies. So you never know whether there is an integration with between what Pompeo is missioned to do and what Trump has in mind. And, you know, we have seen instability and mental instability or decision instability coming from the White House. So once they make a decision and the next minute they can change it. There was criticism from within the United States for what the U.S. has been going through in the Middle East. So I think Pompeo has been sent by Trump to do this fixing, but we're not sure if you know, they have been consistent with the decision they have come up with. He could have made a decision in 1 minute and regret it the next minute, like with Syria pulling out from Syria. We heard that they were going to pull out the 2,000 troops that are right now in Syria, but when criticism came from within the United States, Trump decided that for now it's the vehicles, the military vehicles that are going to be pulled out and not the troops.
Mr. Mustafa, what's your take on how you see, Mr. Mustafa, what is your take on how you see Pompeo and Bolton? Is this them doing damage control as Trump tweets uncontrollably, aggressive, threatening tweets to Turkey, claiming economic devastation to them if they don't agree on the terms of occupying Syria or not fighting the Kurds? How do you see this?
Well, let me explain something first. Despite all the theatrical moves made by Washington, by Donald Trump, they have failed so far to present an integrated foreign policy strategy, especially with regard to Iran and the Middle East. When you take a look at their actions, still you see the same objectives are pursued that were pursued by the Obama administration. In other words, despite all views and cries and media campaign and propaganda and the tweets that Donald Trump is sending, that he actually is going after the same foreign policy goals that Obama did. Obama also called for a pullout of Syria. He started the intervention, but he also called for a pullout. And the same thing is done by Donald Trump. So this shows that there is a deep state strategy making the decisions for the United States, and not, the tweets and the media propaganda that Donald Trump is trying to wage on nations. The whole picture to me is like this. When the U.S. failed in its war of militancy and proxy warfare against Iran in the region, and it backfired because Iran had no plan to deploy in, Syria and Iraq, and it was forced to send advisors after it was called upon by allies in Syria and in Iraq. So they've come to realize that Iran and Russia are basically the winners here, and they may not do anything through hard warfare to reverse the course of events and actions. So now they've come up with the conclusion to do some damage control, because there is a financial burden on the United States for its deployment in Syria. So they are planning to do a couple of moves in order to move on to the next phase of their global strategy and regional strategy. These two moves entail setting the stage and allowing militant groups to reorganize and start the war of militancy across the border between Iraq and Syria, especially in western Iraq, in order to keep Iran and Russia engaged and delay their their plans and their ultimate victory in these two countries. And that's phase one. So they could delay Iran and Russia's ultimate victory for a number of years in their plan. Number two is that they mean to go along, their strategy. In their strategy, they would stop, hard warfare actions like, military actions and battles. And instead, they would move on to try to change the regime in Damascus through economic and software plans. This requires lots of money, and this would be done by the Arab states. So to do the minimum role that the U.S. Has been left with in Syria, they are going to entrust this, burden, this role on their Arab allies to spend the money. As Donald Trump says, it's not our duty to, do nation state and to build nation states. That means if there is to be some time spent and some money spent to change the regime in Iraq and in Syria, this is Saudi Arabia and its allies, Arab allies in the Persian Gulf, that are required to do the spending. So these two moves, that is giving a free space to the militants to restart their, war of militancy, and transferring the role to the minimum role that the U.S. has now to the Arab states to go along the same regime change plans, but this time through soft warfare and economic warfare. This would give them an opportunity to free some of their assets and resources in order to move eastward to deal with Iran, and especially with China, that has gone almost unnoticed in the last couple of decades, while China is the main global rival of the United States. So if you take a look at what Mr. Shanahan, the current caretaker of the Pentagon, as well as Mr. Trump and others are talking about, there are a couple of issues that they always stress. It's China and it's Iran. So instead of dealing with Iranian allies to weaken Iran's allies, or what they call Iran's arms in the region, that they have failed already to do so, they want to put the focus on Iran and especially on China.
Okay, and here I'd like to welcome our third guest. This is Mr. Luciano Zuccara, who is joining us from Doha, and he's a professor of Gulf politics. Thank you for once again joining us here on Newswire as we talk about trying to understand what the U.S. policy on Iran is as it tries to, and Pompeo going and meeting all these Arab states. Do you see that? Is it reasonable to expect that Arab states will transcend their cultural differences and come together, especially to unite against Iran and also align itself with Israel?
Hello. Well, I mean, it's difficult to have a consensus among Arab countries since a long time ago. So on different situations that affect the Middle East, and maybe when it affects Iran or it affects Palestine, we see that they don't have even an agreement about dealing with what is considered a threat, internal and external threat, in the smaller context of the GCC state when one of the countries is blocked by other three members. So it's very difficult to think that it's possible to reach a consensus about common issues that affect all the Arab countries. Regarding Syria, regarding Iran, we see that the different countries in the GCC also, they are having a different approach, whether to reopen embassies or not, depending on which are their interests and which are the situations or which groups they are supporting internally in the conflict. And we have been witnessing since a long time ago the lack of agreement on what to do in the Palestine case, whether to have a more pragmatic relation with Israel or to have a more principalist position toward the Palestine issue. Other countries that they are trying even to mediate among different Palestinian groups. But there hasn't been an agreement between all the states to have a common policy toward any of the issues that affect all of them. And regarding specifically Iran, we know that, I mean, there are a few countries that they are much more concerned about what Iran influence in the region can be, for instance, Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or Emirates, while Oman, Kuwait, and Qatar have a very different approach. And this is only within the GCC context. Imagine extending this same issue to the rest of the Arab countries. So there are different issues, including Iraq and Syria, that they are confronting the way in which the most powerful countries in the Arab context are dealing with. So far, I cannot see that there is a possibility to have a common front either against Iran, because no all the 23 Arab countries that they have a common approach to the Iranian issue, neither to the Palestine issue that should be something that in which they should agree more than any other topic.
So you don't see this as a possible success in getting all the Arab states together on a common front. Let me get your take on this, Ms. Sitara. As the blockade against Qatar continues, does this get in the way of US's achieving its goal in uniting the Arab states?
Yes, I believe that's one of the obstacles which is laying against US's attempts to unite Arab countries against Iran. This is just one of the obstacles because, as we know, the relationship between Qatar and Saudi Arabia also went a little bit sore at one point, and this adds to what is impeding US's attempts to unite all Arab countries against Iran. But let's also not forget that this is just one of the obstacles ahead of the US in that attempt. I think one major obstacle is that many of these Arab regimes, Arab or Persian Gulf countries, have lost their legitimacy among their own people. And I think this is one of the most, preventing obstacles that makes it very difficult or almost impossible for the United States to unite all Arab countries against Iran.
Okay.
Also, we know that,
Mr. Mustafa, if I can ask you this, the concept of Arab alliance, how is this perceived in Iran?
The United States is somehow reducing its activities and presence in the region, especially in Syria. What I'm saying is not that they are going to leave the Middle East, not at all. They have so many troops and equipment and bases in here. And it's the geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geostrategic importance of the Persian Gulf may never allow them to leave this region. But what they intend to do is, leave some parts of the Middle East. That means that the Arab states would find themselves in direct confrontation with Iran, not just Iran, but also Turkey. So they would have a lot to lose, and they are not capable of doing so, especially considering that when we are talking about an Arab alliance, we are only talking about a few, states like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Bahrain that's in trouble already and cannot, run the country itself. But they are not big enough, they are not powerful enough to confront Iran. So I believe at the end of the day, they would be better off if they give it a second thought, especially other Arab states than the ones that I just mentioned, to consider Iran's collective security strategy for the Middle East, where all actors in the Middle East, all states will be actors, and they would all share to the regional stability and security of the Middle East. So it's now time for those Arab states to decide, and it's their call.
Right, it's their call. Now, Mr. Luciano, what, in your opinion, is Iran's relationship with Qatar? And how does this play into this strategic alliance that are being formed here?
Well, I mean, the relation between the two countries is correct. Of course, it's much better than any other country in the GCC context, but this doesn't mean that Iran and Qatar have a long-term strategic alliance. I mean, both countries know the difference. They have recently, Qatar announced that they would never reopen its embassy in Syria, which is absolutely against Iranian interest and position regarding the Syrian conflict, while, for instance, Saudi Arabia, Emirates and Bahrain, they reopen their embassies, even though they don't have good relations with the Syrian government, and they have much worse relations with Iran. But that said, I mean, both Iranians and Qatari officials, they are very comfortable with the current situation in which Iran is providing Qatar an exit, mainly for the airplanes, and they provide with a lot of products that Qatar was before buying to Emirates and Saudi, so they have a very good trade relation that increased more than double or triple from the previous year because of the sanctions that Qatar is facing. But this doesn't mean that this trade relation will last forever. I mean, we don't know if the blockade will continue 1 year, 2 years, or long term. But in any case, my main assumption is that this it's a circumstantial trade relation that, as far as the situation with Saudi Arabia is resolved,
so it remains to be seen how they do on the diplomatic front. Thank you so much, Mr. Luciano. Mr. Mustafa, quickly coming to you as we reach the end of the program. The U.S. administration is so bent upon Iran. Why is this so, in your opinion? What is the real threat that Iran imposes on USA?
Well, Iran's Islamic Revolution, caused overthrew Shah, a dictator that was the gendarme of the United States in this region. So there is every reason for the United States to be angry at the Islamic Republic of Iran because there is a major clash of interests. They are pursuing illegitimate and legitimate interests thousands of miles away from home, while Iran, as my colleagues stated, is living in the same region, and Iran is pursuing independence and security for itself and for its neighbors. So a country like Iran would never allow the United States to go in, for its illegitimate interests in the region so freely. So other states are watching Iran, especially Arab Muslim states and other Muslim states. They are seeing that Iran has been under sanctions for 4 decades. It's been faced with various velvet revolutions and coups d'etats by the United States, but it is standing firm, and it has made major progress in various areas of science and technology, stem cell technology, satellite technology, satellite launch technology.
And Iran continues to progress on various fronts. Thank you, Mr. Mustafa, Ms. Sitara, and Mr. Luciano for giving your valuable inputs on what the U.S. policy in Iran is going to be. Despite the economic sanctions on Iran, it does progress in lots of technical and other fields. And that's all the time we have for today. Till next week, we'll see you then, and goodbye.